classroom always felt louder than it needed to be. Chairs scraped against the floor, students talked over each other, and laughter bounced off the walls like it had nowhere else to go. In the middle of all that noise, he usually sat near the window, close enough to feel a little breeze when it was open. That spot was his small comfort. From there, he could look outside when things felt overwhelming. He was not the kind of student teachers worried about. He did not cause trouble. He did not argue. He did not skip class. But he also was not the kind they praised. He stayed quiet, finished his work, and kept his head down. When groups were formed, he was often the last one picked. Not because people disliked him, but because they barely noticed him. He had learned a long time ago that being invisible was easier than trying to stand out and failing. In music class, things felt even more uncomfortable. The room was filled with big personalities. Some students loved to sing loudly, even when they were off-key. Others joked around with the instruments, pretending to be famous performers. The teacher encouraged confidence. Music is about expression, the teacher would often say. You have to be bold. Bold was not a word anyone would use to describe him. He usually sat at the back during music lessons. If there were drums, he tapped lightly. If there were recorders, he played softly. Just enough to pass. Never enough to draw attention. The teacher had a habit of scanning the room and picking students randomly to demonstrate something in front of the class. Whenever that happened, his heart would beat faster. He would lower his eyes, hoping not to be noticed. Most of the time, it worked. But what nobody in that classroom knew was that his real life started after school. He lived in a small apartment with thin walls and old paint that peeled near the corners. It was not fancy. The furniture did not match. The kitchen light flickered sometimes. But in the living room, near the window, stood an old upright piano. It had scratches on the sides and a few keys slightly chipped at the edges. It was not perfectly tuned either. Some notes sounded softer than others. To him, it was the most important thing in the world. The piano had belonged to someone his family knew years ago. When they moved away, they did not want to carry it with them. It ended up in his apartment almost by accident. At first, it was just another piece of old furniture taking up space. Then one day, when he was younger, he pressed a key out of curiosity. The sound surprised him. It was simple, just one note, but it felt alive. He pressed another, then another. Slowly, he started trying small melodies he had heard before. First, it was messy. He made mistakes. He hit wrong notes. But he kept trying. There were no professional lessons. No expensive classes. No one guiding his fingers. He watched free videos online and paused them again and again, copying hand movements. Sometimes he replayed the same 10 seconds for an hour just to understand how the notes flowed together. Practice became his daily routine. After homework, after dinner, sometimes even late into the night with the volume kept soft so he would not disturb the neighbors. The piano became his place of honesty. When he was frustrated, the keys felt heavier. When he was calm, the melodies felt smooth. When he felt ignored at school, he played longer, letting the music say what he never could. But he never told anyone at school about it. Part of him feared that if he shared it, people would laugh. What if they expected something amazing and he disappointed them? What if the old piano at home made him sound better than he really was? It felt safer to keep it private. At school, he let people believe he was average. One afternoon, during music class, the teacher walked in with unusual energy. "Today," the teacher announced, clapping hands once, "we're going to have some fun." The class immediately became louder. Some students cheered. Others groaned, guessing it meant performing in front of everyone. There was a large piano at the front of the classroom. It was much newer than the one at his home. Shiny, polished, almost intimidating. The teacher explained that everyone would take turns playing something simple. It did not have to be perfect. It was just an exercise in confidence. His stomach tightened. One by one, students went up. Some played basic scales. Some pressed random notes and laughed through it. The class clapped for everyone, sometimes seriously, sometimes jokingly. He kept hoping the bell would ring before his name was called. As more students finished, the list became shorter. His name had not been called yet, but he knew it was coming. He could feel it. His palms started to sweat. He thought about pretending to feel sick. He thought about asking to go to the restroom, but that would only make things worse. People would notice then. The teacher held the paper with the names and looked around the room. "Let's see," the teacher said casually. "You haven't had a turn yet." And then his name was called. A few students turned around to look at him. Some raised their eyebrows in surprise. A quiet ripple of laughter passed through the room. Not cruel but doubtful. He felt his face grow warm. The teacher added, in a light tone that felt heavier than it sounded, "Come on, let's see what you can do." It did not feel like an invitation. Felt like a spotlight. He stood up slowly. His legs felt stiff as he walked to the front of the room. Every step seemed louder than it should be. He could hear whispers behind him. He kept his eyes on the piano. Up close, it looked even bigger. The keys were clean and bright under the classroom lights. He sat down carefully on the bench. For a second, he just stared at the keys. His mind raced. Should he play something simple? Something short? Should he pretend not to know much just to match what people expected? Then another thought came to him. This is just a piano, not a stage, not a competition, just keys and sound. He placed his fingers lightly on the keys but did not press them yet. He took one slow breath. In that moment, the classroom noise faded in his mind. He imagined he was back in his small living room at home, near the window where the world felt quieter. He did not start playing yet. The room waited. A few students shifted in their seats. For the first time in a long while, he felt something different from fear. He felt a small spark of courage. Not the loud, show-off kind of courage. Just the quiet kind that says, try. He knew that once he pressed the first key, there would be no going back. People would hear him. They would judge him. They would form opinions. But maybe, just maybe, they would hear something real. His fingers lowered slightly, and just before the first note filled the room, something inside him changed. He was no longer the quiet student trying to hide. He was simply someone about to play. The first note was soft. So soft that a few students in the back kept whispering because they thought he had not really started. But then the second note followed, clearer this time. Then a third. Within a few seconds, the small sounds began to connect, forming something gentle and steady. The room slowly began to quiet down. He did not rush. His fingers moved carefully, like he was testing the piano, getting to know it. The keys felt smoother than the old ones at home. The sound was brighter too. For a brief moment, he worried that his hands might shake. But they didn't. Instead, something familiar settled inside him. It was the same feeling he had every evening when the world outside his apartment became silent, and the only thing he could hear was the hum of the ceiling fan and the piano in front of him. He let the melody grow. The piece he chose was not something simple from the school book. It was something he had practiced many times at home. Something emotional. Something that began quietly but slowly built strength. In the classroom, a few students straightened in their seats. The laughter had stopped completely now. The teacher, who had been leaning against the desk with folded arms, slowly uncrossed them. His fingers moved with more confidence. The soft introduction turned into a flowing rhythm. His left hand carried the deeper notes while his right hand danced lightly across the higher keys. It did not look forced. It did not look nervous. It looked natural. A student in the front row blinked a few times, as if trying to understand what was happening. Another leaned forward, resting elbows on the desk. No one expected this. Just a minute earlier, they were waiting for awkward mistakes. They were ready to giggle if he pressed the wrong key. Some had already decided in their minds that this would be uncomfortable. But now something else was happening. The music began to fill the entire room. It was not loud in a noisy way. It was powerful in a quiet way. The melody carried emotion that did not need words. Felt honest. He forgot about the classroom. He forgot about the eyes watching him. His hands moved faster now but still controlled. Every note landed exactly where it should. The transitions were smooth. When the music swelled, it felt like a wave rising higher and higher. In the back of the room, someone whispered, Is that really him? The teacher took a step closer to the piano. There was no sarcasm left on the teacher's face. Only surprise. He reached the middle of the piece, the part he loved the most. It was the section that required more skill, more speed. The part he had struggled with months ago, replaying again and again in his small apartment until he finally got it right. Now, in front of everyone, he played it without hesitation. His fingers moved quickly across the keys, crossing over each other smoothly. The sound grew fuller, richer. The classroom felt different now. Still, focused. One student who usually joked about everything sat frozen, mouth slightly open. Another had stopped tapping a pen against the desk. Even the air felt heavier, as if it did not want to interrupt the music. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. Not in a loud way, not with people calling his name or cheering yet, but in the way that mattered. They were listening, and he was not hiding anymore. The music softened again, moving into a gentle section. His hands slowed down. The notes became delicate, almost fragile. Felt like telling a story without speaking. A story about long nights of practice. About frustration when he missed a chord. About quiet dreams he never shared. His shoulders relaxed. The fear that had followed him to the front of the classroom had disappeared completely. In its place was something stronger. Not pride exactly, just peace. He reached the final build-up. The melody rose again, this time stronger than before, confident, clear, the kind of sound that makes people hold their breath without realizing it. He pressed the final chord. The sound echoed for a brief moment before fading into silence. And then there was nothing. No whispers, no laughter, no immediate applause, just silence. He slowly lifted his hands from the keys. For a second, he wondered if he had done something wrong. Maybe it was not as good as he thought. Maybe they were confused. He did not look up right away. Then he heard it. A single clap came from somewhere near the front of the room. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire classroom erupted into applause. It was not polite clapping. It was loud, real, surprised. A few students even stood up without thinking. His head snapped up slightly, eyes wide. He had not expected this reaction. He had prepared himself for awkward silence or small claps out of kindness. But this was different. The teacher stepped forward slowly. The expression on the teacher's face had completely changed. There was no hint of humor anymore. No teasing tone. That, the teacher said quietly, almost to themselves, was not a joke. The class laughed lightly at that, but this time it was not at him. It was with him. He stood up from the bench, unsure of what to do with his hands. They still felt warm from playing. His heart was beating fast again, but not from fear, from something else, something new. A student near the aisle called out, "Since when can you play like that?" Another asked, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" He gave a small, shy smile but did not answer right away. Words felt harder than music. The teacher looked at him carefully. "Where did you learn to play?" The teacher asked, this time with genuine curiosity. "At home," he replied softly. "At home?" the teacher repeated. He nodded. "I just practice." There was a short pause. The teacher seemed to search for more words but did not immediately find them. It was clear that something inside the room had shifted. The image everyone had of him no longer matched reality. He was not just the quiet student by the window. He was someone who had been carrying a hidden talent all along. The bell rang suddenly, loud and sharp, breaking the moment. Normally, students rushed out the door as soon as they heard it. But this time, many stayed seated for a few seconds longer. As he walked back to his seat, a few classmates lightly tapped his shoulder. Not in a teasing way, in respect. He sat down again near the window, but the spot felt different now. The same desk, the same chair, the same sunlight coming through the glass. But something had changed. People were looking at him, not past him. He tried to focus on packing his bag, but he could still hear small conversations around him. "I had no idea. That was insane. He's actually really good," the teacher called out before anyone fully left. "We'll continue this tomorrow." The tone was serious. As students slowly filed out of the classroom, a few stopped by his desk. "You should play at the school event next month," one suggested. He blinked in surprise. "What?" "Yeah, seriously," another said. "You'd be amazing." He wasn't sure how to respond. Just hours ago, he had been hoping not to be noticed. Now people were inviting him to stand on a stage. Felt overwhelming, but not in a bad way. When he finally stepped out into the hallway, the noise of the school returned. Lockers closing, footsteps, conversations about homework and lunch. Yet inside him, everything felt calmer than usual. He had not planned to reveal this part of himself. It had happened because he was pushed into it, because someone thought it would be funny, and maybe in a strange way he was grateful. If his name had not been called, if he had stayed hidden again, none of this would have happened. He walked home that afternoon thinking about the look on everyone's faces, the silence before the applause, the sound of clapping filling the room. When he reached his apartment, he went straight to the old piano by the window. He ran his fingers gently across the worn keys. The sound was softer than the school piano, less polished, but it felt like home. He played the same piece again. This time he smiled, because now the music was no longer just his secret. It had finally been heard. The next morning felt different the moment he stepped through the school gates. Nothing around him had changed. The same security guard stood near the entrance. The same groups of students gathered in their usual spots. The same morning noise filled the air. But for him, something was not the same. A few students who had never spoken to him before nodded as they passed by. One even gave him a quick smile. It was small, but he noticed. He kept walking, backpack over one shoulder, trying not to think too much about it. Maybe it was just temporary. Maybe by next week, everything would go back to normal. He almost hoped it would. Being noticed felt strange. When he reached his classroom, 2 students were already inside. They looked up as he entered. "Hey," one of them said. "That was crazy yesterday." He paused for a second, unsure how to respond. "Thanks," he said quietly. "Seriously," the other added. "Why didn't you tell anyone you could play like that?" He gave the same answer he had given before. "I just practice at home." They looked at each other like that explanation was not enough. Before he could say anything else, more students walked in. The room slowly filled. The noise grew louder. But this time he noticed something new. The whispers were not about homework or weekend plans. They were about him. "That's him. He's the one who played. I thought it was fake at first." He sat down at his usual seat by the window, but he could feel eyes on him now. Not in a harsh way, just curious. When the teacher walked in, the room became quiet faster than usual. The teacher placed a folder on the desk and looked around. "Before we begin," the teacher said, clearing their throat, "I want to talk about yesterday." The class shifted in their seats. The teacher's eyes briefly met his. "I owe someone an apology." The room went silent again. The teacher continued, "Yesterday, I called him up thinking it would be just another small classroom activity. I did not expect that level of skill. And I should not have assumed." A few students nodded. The teacher turned slightly toward him. "You surprised all of us, including me." He felt his face grow warm again. He was not used to this kind of attention, especially not from a teacher. "I would like you to consider performing at the school assembly next month," the teacher added. "We have been looking for someone to play during the opening." The classroom reacted immediately. Some students whispered excitedly. Others looked impressed. His heart skipped. An assembly meant the entire school. Hundreds of students, teachers, parents maybe. That was not the same as one classroom. He swallowed. I don't know," he said honestly. The teacher gave a small smile. "Think about it. There's no pressure. But talent like yours should not stay hidden." The words stayed in his mind long after the lesson began. Talent like yours should not stay hidden. All day, different students approached him. In the hallway, at lunch, even near the lockers. One asked if he could teach them a few chords. Another wanted to know what song he had played. A group of younger students stared at him like he was suddenly important. Felt unreal. Just days ago, he could walk through the hallway unnoticed. Now, people were stepping aside to let him pass. At lunch, he usually sat at the corner table. That day, 2 students asked if they could join him. "Sure," he said, surprised. They talked about music, about favorite songs, about how long it takes to learn something difficult. For once, he was not just listening. He was part of the conversation. But along with the excitement, something else quietly grew inside him. Pressure. What if he could not repeat what he did yesterday? What if it was just one good performance? That evening at home, he sat at his old piano again. The apartment felt smaller than usual. The walls thinner. The air heavier. He placed his fingers on the keys and tried to play the same piece. The first few notes came out fine. But then he made a mistake. A small one. Still, it bothered him. He stopped. The applause from the classroom replayed in his mind. The teacher's apology. The invitation to perform at the assembly. He had never played for that many people before. He tried again. This time, he focused less on being perfect and more on the feeling. On why he started playing in the first place. Not for applause. Not for attention. But because it made him feel understood. The music slowly returned to its natural flow. As he played, he realized something important. Yesterday was not luck. It was years of quiet practice. Years of choosing to sit at the piano instead of scrolling on a phone. Years of repeating difficult parts until his fingers memorized them. He had earned that moment. The next day at school, the teacher stopped him after class. "I spoke with the principal," the teacher said. "They are very interested in having you perform." He shifted nervously. "What if I mess up?" The teacher looked at him carefully. "Everyone makes mistakes. But yesterday was not an accident. You have control. You have emotion in your playing. That cannot be faked." He did not answer right away. "Think of it this way," the teacher continued. "Yesterday you played because you were asked. At the assembly you would play because you choose to. That made a difference." The idea of choosing felt stronger than being pushed. Later that afternoon, as he sat by the window again, he watched students crossing the field outside. Some running, some laughing, some arguing. For the first time, he did not feel separate from them. He felt part of the same story. A student approached his desk again. "So, are you going to do it?" "I'm still thinking," he replied. "You have to," the student insisted. "You'll be amazing." He smiled slightly. The word amazing still felt too big for him. That night, he talked about it at home. There was no dramatic speech. No big reaction. Just quiet support. "If you want to do it, he was told. "If you don't, that's okay too. No pressure. Just trust." He returned to the piano and played something new this time. Something brighter. Something that felt hopeful. Halfway through, he stopped and imagined the school stage. The large hall. The lights. The rows of chairs. His hands felt slightly cold just thinking about it. But then he imagined something else. He imagined walking off the stage knowing he did not hide. Knowing he gave his best. The next morning, he found the teacher before class started. "I'll do it," he said quietly. The teacher's face lit up. "Good. We'll start preparing." And just like that, the next chapter of his life began. What started as a joke in one classroom was now turning into something bigger. He walked back to his seat near the window, but this time he did not look outside to escape. He looked forward, because now the music was no longer just a private comfort. It was becoming his voice. The announcement was made 3 days later. During morning assembly, the principal stood on the stage holding a clipboard, reading through upcoming events. Most students were only half listening, waiting for it to end. Then his name was mentioned. "There will be a special piano performance at next month's school assembly," the principal said. "We're proud to have one of our own students opening the event." A soft wave of whispers moved through the hall. He stood among hundreds of students, staring at the stage while his heart beat harder than it had during his classroom performance. Being known inside one room was one thing. Being announced in front of the entire school was something else. A few students near him turned around and smiled. One lightly nudged his shoulder. "That's you," they whispered. He forced a small smile back, but inside, the reality was sinking in. This was real. From that day on, things moved quickly. The music teacher began giving him access to the music room during free periods. Sometimes after school, he stayed behind to practice on the grand piano in the auditorium. The first time he walked into the auditorium alone, it felt enormous. Rows of empty seats stretched out in front of the stage. The ceiling seemed higher than he remembered. Even his footsteps echoed. The piano sat in the center under soft lights. It looked beautiful, perfect, almost intimidating. He walked toward it slowly and ran his fingers over the smooth surface. This was different from the classroom piano, different from his old piano at home. He sat down and pressed one key. The sound filled the entire hall. It was powerful, clear. Every small movement echoed back at him. For a second, doubt returned. What if the space was too big? What if he froze? He closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes sounded almost too loud in the empty auditorium, but as he continued, he adjusted. He learned how softly he needed to press the keys so the melody would feel balanced. Day after day, he practiced there. Sometimes the teacher sat quietly in the back row, listening without interrupting. Other times, the hall was empty, and it was just him and the sound of the piano. Word about his upcoming performance spread faster than he expected. Students he had never spoken to before would stop him in the hallway. "Are you nervous? What are you going to play? Can we come early to get good seats?" He answered politely, but each question added a little more weight to his shoulders. One afternoon, while practicing alone, he made several mistakes in a row. His fingers slipped. The rhythm felt off. Frustration built inside him. He stopped playing and stared at the keys. "What if I can't do it that day?" he whispered to himself. The empty hall gave no answer. He rested his hands in his lap and thought back to the first time he ever touched the piano at home. There had been no audience then, no expectations, just curiosity. Somewhere along the way, the music had become tied to pressure. He realized he needed to return to the reason he started. Not to impress, not to prove anything, just to play. The next day, instead of practicing the performance piece right away, he played something simple, something soft and familiar, a melody he loved but never planned to perform. The tension in his shoulders slowly eased. Later that week, the teacher approached him after practice. "You're improving every day," the teacher said. "But I can see you're thinking too much." He looked down. "I don't want to disappoint anyone." The teacher nodded. "That's normal. But remember, the reason everyone was impressed in the classroom wasn't just skill. It was honesty. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just playing." The words stayed with him. As the day of the assembly grew closer, posters appeared around school announcing the event. His name was printed in bold letters under the word, "Special Performance." Seeing it in writing made everything feel bigger. At lunch one day, he overheard two students talking nearby. "I heard he's been practicing every day. I hope it's as good as last time." Hope. That word felt heavier than expectation. At home, he practiced more carefully now. Not longer, just more focused. He paid attention to small details. The way one note blended into the next. The timing between sections. The feeling behind each phrase. One evening, while playing near the window, he noticed something. He was no longer hiding the sound. Before, he used to play softly so neighbors would not complain. Now he allowed the music to rise. Not loudly enough to disturb anyone, but confidently enough to fill the room. It was a small change, but it meant something. The day before the assembly, the teacher called him to the stage during rehearsal. The auditorium was partially filled with staff preparing decorations and adjusting lights. "Let's do one full run," the teacher said. He walked to the piano under the bright stage lights. They felt warmer than he expected. He blinked a few times, adjusting. He began to play. Halfway through, someone accidentally dropped something backstage. The sudden noise broke his concentration, and he hit a wrong note. His heart jumped. He almost stopped, but instead he continued. He corrected himself smoothly and kept going as if nothing had happened. When he finished, the teacher clapped softly from the front row. That, the teacher said, is what matters. Not perfection. Recovery. He nodded slowly. That night he barely slept. Thoughts kept circling in his mind. The stage. The seats. The faces. In the morning, the school felt electric. Students moved faster than usual. There was excitement in the air. He wore a simple, neat outfit. Nothing flashy. Just clean and comfortable. Backstage, he waited quietly while the assembly began. Speeches were given. Awards were handed out. His hands felt slightly cold. The teacher stood beside him. Ready? The teacher asked gently. He took a deep breath. I think so. When his name was announced, the sound of applause reached backstage. It was louder than he expected. He stepped into the light. For a brief second, the brightness made it hard to see the audience. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw rows and rows of faces. Students, teachers, the principal, all looking at him. He walked to the piano and sat down. The hall slowly became quiet. He placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, fear tried to return. But then he remembered the small apartment, the old piano, the nights of practice, the classroom where this all began. He pressed the first note. The sound traveled through the hall, clear and strong. The room fell completely silent. He began to play, and once again the music started to speak for him. The first few notes floated gently through the auditorium, clear and steady. The large hall that had felt so intimidating just seconds earlier became quiet in a different way now. Not tense, not distracted, just focused. He kept his eyes on the keys. The stage lights were warm against his face, but he barely noticed them anymore. His fingers moved with the same calm rhythm they had learned over years of practice. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper, and then slowly grew stronger. From the audience, no one moved. Teachers who usually checked their watches during assemblies were now leaning slightly forward. Students who had come expecting a short performance before the real event were sitting straighter in their chairs. He reached the first build-up of the piece. His left hand carried the deeper tones while his right hand moved faster, creating a layered sound that filled every corner of the hall. The grand piano responded beautifully. Every key felt alive under his touch. For a brief second, he allowed himself to look up. Rows and rows of faces stared back at him. But instead of fear, he saw something else. Interest. Respect. He looked back down and continued. Halfway through the performance, something unexpected happened. One of the notes sounded slightly sharper than usual. Not a big mistake, just a tiny shift in tone. His heart reacted instantly, but this time he did not panic. He adjusted his touch on the next chord, balancing the sound naturally. Most people in the audience did not even notice, and those who did saw how smoothly he recovered. He remembered what the teacher had said during rehearsal. Not perfection. Recovery. The music flowed on. As he moved into the emotional center of the piece, the tempo slowed. The notes became softer, almost fragile. In that moment, the entire hall felt smaller, more personal. It was as if he was playing for one person instead of hundreds. He thought about the old piano near the window at home, the chipped keys, the flickering kitchen light in the background, the quiet nights when no one was listening except him. Back then, he had no idea that those small moments would lead to this stage. The melody began to rise again, stronger now, more confident. His fingers moved quickly but with control. Years of repetition guided them without effort. In the front row, the principal sat still, hands folded, eyes fixed on the stage. The music swelled into its final build-up. It was the strongest part of the piece, the moment where everything came together. Emotion, technique, timing. He gave it everything he had. The final chord rang out clearly, deep and full. And then there was silence. Not awkward silence. The kind that lingers because people are still absorbing what they just heard. For one heartbeat, then another, and then the auditorium exploded with applause. It was loud, louder than anything he had ever heard directed at him. Students stood up. Some teachers clapped with wide smiles. A few students even cheered. He froze for a moment, hands still hovering near the keys. The sound of applause felt almost unreal. He slowly stood up from the bench and turned toward the audience. The lights made it hard to see every face clearly, but he could see enough. They were not laughing. They were not whispering. They were proud. He gave a small bow, something he had only seen in videos online. The applause grew even louder. Backstage, the teacher stood near the curtain, clapping harder than anyone. When he walked off stage, the teacher placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did more than I expected," the teacher said quietly. "You owned that stage." He exhaled deeply, not realizing until then how tightly he had been holding his breath. "I almost made a mistake," he admitted. "You did make one," the teacher replied gently. "But you handled it like a professional." Professional. That word echoed in his mind. As the assembly continued with the next segment, he sat backstage trying to process everything. His hands were still slightly shaking, but not from fear, from excitement. Students began messaging him during the assembly. His phone vibrated quietly in his pocket. "That was insane. Best part of the assembly. You should compete somewhere." When the event finally ended and students were dismissed, a small crowd formed near the stage exit. He did not expect that. Some wanted to congratulate him. Others wanted to ask questions. A few just wanted to say they were proud to go to the same school. He answered politely, still a little overwhelmed. One younger student stepped forward shyly. "I just started learning keyboard," they said. "After watching you, I want to practice more." That comment meant more to him than the applause. In the hallway later, even teachers from other departments stopped him. "I had no idea," one said with a smile. "You've got real talent," another added. For the first time, walking through school did not feel like passing through unnoticed space. It felt like belonging. But something else had changed too. Inside him, he realized the applause felt good. But it was not the most important part. The most important part was that he had stepped forward when he could have stayed hidden. He had chosen to play. After school, he returned home with a different energy. The apartment looked the same as always. The same worn couch. The same small table. The same old piano near the window. He sat down at it without even taking off his shoes. He pressed a key. The sound was softer than the grand piano at school. Less powerful. But it felt warmer. He played the same piece again, but this time it felt lighter. There was no pressure attached to it anymore. He smiled while playing. For years, the piano had been his private world. A place where he could escape being overlooked. Now it had become something else. A bridge. Connection. The next day at school, the principal called him into the office. Not for trouble. For opportunity. "We'd like to recommend you for a regional student arts program," the principal said. It could open doors for scholarships and formal training. He listened carefully, still not fully believing this was happening. Weeks ago, he was the quiet student in the back of the room. Now, people were talking about his future. But even with all the attention, he did not change overnight. He still sat near the window in class. Still spoke softly. Still kept to himself sometimes. The difference was that he no longer felt invisible. Students treated him differently, but not in a dramatic way. More respectfully. More thoughtfully. The teacher, who had once called him to play almost as a joke, now often asked his opinion during music lessons. "What do you think about this section?" the teacher would ask. And he would answer carefully but confidently. The shift was not just about talent. It was about being seen. One afternoon, as he walked past the music room, he heard someone inside practicing clumsily on the piano. The notes were uneven, hesitant. He paused. Then he walked in. The student looked embarrassed. "Sorry, I'm not very good." He smiled gently. "That's how it starts." He sat beside them and showed them a simple pattern to practice. As the notes slowly became smoother, he realized something. The biggest change was not that people admired him now. It was that he understood his own worth. And all of it had started with one moment. One teacher. One joke. One decision not to hide. The music had always been inside him. He just needed the chance to let it be heard. And now there was no going back to silence. Life did not turn into a movie after that day. There were no flashing cameras waiting outside the school gates. No sudden fame. No dramatic headlines. But something quieter and more meaningful had changed. The days after the assembly felt calmer. The excitement slowly settled, but the respect remained. Students still talked about the performance, but now it came with normal conversations about homework, exams, and weekend plans. He liked that balance. He did not want to be treated like a celebrity. He just wanted to be treated like someone who mattered. The regional arts program invitation became real a few weeks later. Forms were signed. Audition dates were set. For the first time in his life, he stepped into a proper music center outside of school. The building was larger than he expected, filled with practice rooms and framed photos of past performers on the walls. Some students there had been taking professional lessons since childhood. They spoke easily about music theory and complex terms he had only seen online. For a moment, old doubts tried to return. Maybe I don't belong here. But then he remembered the classroom, the laughter that had turned into applause, the auditorium stage, the younger student who said they wanted to practice more after hearing him play. He did belong. During the audition, he sat at another grand piano. Different place, different audience, but the same keys, the same sound, the same feeling under his fingers. He played with honesty, not to compete, not to impress, just to show who he was. Weeks later, the acceptance letter arrived. He had been selected for the program. It was not just a small opportunity. It meant mentorship, training, and possible scholarships for the future. When he shared the news at school, the music teacher smiled in a way that showed both pride and reflection. "I'm glad I called you up that day," the teacher admitted quietly. He gave a small laugh. "Me too." There was no bitterness about how it started. Only understanding. That moment in the classroom had not been kind in intention, but it had led to something meaningful. And sometimes life works that way. As months passed, he balanced schoolwork and music practice carefully. He still sat by the window in class, but now people often joined him. Group projects became easier. Conversations felt natural. He had not changed his personality. He had simply allowed people to see a part of him he once kept hidden. One afternoon, the school organized another event, this time smaller. The music teacher asked him to help coordinate student performances. "Not as the main act," the teacher explained. "As support." He agreed. Instead of being the one in the spotlight, he helped other students prepare. He listened to their practice sessions. He gave small suggestions about timing and confidence. When someone felt nervous, he told them honestly, "It's okay to be scared. Just don't let it stop you." He meant it. The day of that event, he stood at the side of the stage watching another student perform for the first time. Their hands trembled at the beginning, just like his had once. But they finished strong. And when the applause came, he felt proud in a different way. Not because he was on stage, but because he had helped someone else reach it. At home, the old piano still stood near the window. It had not changed. The chipped keys were still chipped. The sound was still slightly uneven. But now it carried more memories. He no longer played only to escape. He played to grow. Sometimes he opened the window while practicing. The sound drifted outside into the evening air. A neighbor once knocked on the door, not to complain, but to say they enjoyed listening. He smiled at that. Years later, when people asked him how his journey began, he did not start with the assembly. He did not start with the regional program. He started with the classroom, with the moment his name was called, with the walk to the piano while classmates expected a joke. That was the turning point, not because it proved others wrong, but because it proved something to himself. He had spent years believing that staying invisible was safer, that hiding his talent protected him from judgment, but hiding also kept him from growth. That day, sitting in front of his classmates, he could have played something simple and forgettable. He could have matched their expectations. Instead, he chose to be real. And that choice changed everything. The teacher changed too. In future classes, the teacher became more careful about assumptions, more observant of quiet students, more encouraging in a sincere way. The classroom atmosphere shifted slowly. Students who were once overlooked began to receive more chances to show what they could do. One small moment had created a ripple effect. Years later, after finishing school, he returned to visit. The building looked smaller than he remembered. The hallways narrower. The classroom windows not as tall. The music room still had the same piano. He stepped inside quietly while the teacher was setting up for a lesson. For a second, they simply looked at each other and smiled. "You remember this room?" the teacher asked. "How could I forget?" he replied. He walked to the piano and pressed a single key. The sound echoed softly. A group of current students sat nearby, curious about the visitor. "This is the student I told you about," the teacher said. "The one who surprised all of us." He shook his head gently. "I didn't surprise anyone. I just played." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He had stepped forward when it was easier to shrink back. Before leaving, he turned to the students in the room. "If you have something you love doing," he said simply, "don't wait for someone to give you permission. Practice it. Protect it. And when the moment comes, don't hide." The words were not dramatic. They were honest. As he walked out of the school building for the last time, he glanced toward the classroom window where he used to sit. He could almost see his younger self there, quiet, unnoticed, unsure. He wished he could tell that version of himself one thing. You are not invisible. You are just waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, let yourself be seen. What began as a joke had turned into a lesson. Not just about music, but about courage. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is not silent due to lack of ability. Sometimes they are simply waiting for the chance to play. And when they do, the world listens.